I was recently conducting an interview with a couple who wanted to baptize their 2-year-old son. And this 2-year-old son was present for the interview. And it was clear that he had recently learned 2 words, no and mine. And he had clearly seen that these 2 words gave him a new sense of control in his life. And he used them quite liberally and quite frequently during the interview to continually assert his control in this big world that he was now becoming a part of. You know, thankfully, that energy of a 2-year-old, which is quite normal for a 2-year-old, develops and grows, and 2-year-olds become 6-year-olds and become 20-year-olds and become 40-year-olds and 60-year-olds and so on. And yet, it would seem that that energy of the 2-year-old remains within all of us, individually and collectively. And whether we like to admit it, we still wrestle with those energies. Kind of the need to sometimes assert no, and oftentimes that sense of wanting to claim mine and not yours. In all the readings today, and hopefully you have a chance to read the scripture readings for this Sunday as we reflect on them together, but all the readings have the same type of energy that's happening in them. The followers of Moses, the Israelites in the midst of the desert, some of his followers are angry that other people who aren't part of the group are prophesying. In the gospel today, some of the apostles are angry that folks that are not part of their group are casting out demons. And James is wrestling in the second reading today with folks that seem to think that amassing more and more for themselves seems to be the goal of life. In all of these scriptures, all Moses and Jesus and James push back to that thinking, push back against the energy of the 2-year-old, one that resorts to mine and no, us and them. All of them move their listeners, their disciples, their followers, their fellow journeyers to the more expansive view of God. It's interesting that in the scriptures today, it's clear that the way to undo the thinking of the 2-year-old is really by listening to the stories, as Jesus would say, of the little ones. It's clear in the scriptures today, as it is throughout all of the scriptures, that the voices that God hears first are the voices of the beaten, the broken, the oppressed. Certainly in the first reading, we have Moses walking with people who were the victims of slavery and oppression and the misuse of power. God heard their cries. God intervened, and God walked with them for 40 years through the desert. Jesus says today, be very careful about ever disregarding, or abusing the little ones, who obviously clearly find favor with God. And James, perhaps with the strongest of words, reminding those who have amassed lots and lots of wealth, to remind them that, guess what? God hears first the cries of the ones you have neglected, abused, overlooked, or perhaps even walked over in order to amass your wealth. In the end, you may think you have everything, but in the eyes and in the ears of God, you have nothing. And so, sisters and brothers, as we celebrate the Eucharist today throughout the world, we celebrate Migration Sunday. This moment in time where there are more people walking and journeying and fleeing violence and poverty and chaos throughout the globe, more than ever in the time of human history. And we're all wrestling with what to do. We're all wrestling with the energy that we want to bring to this human crisis. This is not a political issue. This is an issue of faith. And you and I look first to the scriptures. You and I look first to that faith that grounds us in this world. And today the scriptures clearly orient us in how we might want to more and more think about the migrations of peoples, our sisters and our brothers, how we might do that. And I would suggest to us, perhaps as a practical maybe outcome of today, of this Migration Sunday, and also these scriptures, is to commit ourselves to become better listeners, to listen to the stories, the experiences of those that are migrating, that are fleeing, that we not get caught up in the anecdotal negative story, but rather have the discipline as people of faith to truly hear the hearts, the stories, the experiences of our sisters and brothers who have left everything to try to find life. And whenever we find that discipline too difficult, too uncomfortable, or perhaps too challenging, we might remind ourselves that it's when we hear those stories, when we allow our hearts to be touched by those stories, when we see life differently, we are in fact standing with the Creator, standing with God, hearing with God's ears, seeing with God's eyes, feeling with God's heart. It's clear from the scriptures, sisters and brothers, that that's where God is. The challenge for us is continually, as people of faith, to move ourselves, sometimes little by little, sometimes difficult, with great difficulty, some with great uncomfortableness, to actually move ourselves more and more to that place. And we are confident that in that place, as uncomfortable as it might be, and as much change as it may demand of us, we will in fact encounter, find, and discover again the very presence of God.